I'm Jim Check with KelownaNow, and I have with me Renee
Renee
Merrifield.
Renee Merrifield, recovering politician and business and community participant.
And all the way from Toronto this morning.
Absolutely, die hard. I'm a die hard. I've been up since 2 o'clock your time. So
There you go. Working hard, right? That's what everybody needs these days, working hard. We need people working
absolutely.
hard. Let's start with Trump. Trump tariffs. So everybody's talking about the Trump tariffs, the big threat that came down yesterday. They said if you don't seal those borders, you're going to get a 25% tariff. And that threat went out to Canada and Mexico.
Well, I thought it was really interesting. He didn't do it through his normal, or is it his normal, right? This might be the new normal, which is it was actually a post on a tweet. And I want to read it because I think it's really, I think it's something that we as Canadians need to take note of. But I'll try and go as quickly as I can. And this is what he says. As everyone is aware, thousands of people are pouring through Mexico and Canada, bringing crime and drugs at levels never seen before. Right now, a caravan coming from Mexico composed of thousands of people seems to be unstoppable in its quest to come through our currently open border. On January 20th, as one of my many first executive orders, I will sign all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States and its ridiculous open borders. This tariff will remain in effect until such time as, and I think this is the most important, drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country. Both Mexico and Canada have the absolute right and power to easily resolve this long simmering problem. We hereby demand that they use this power, and until such time as they do, it is time for them to pay a very big price. End quote. So Trump basically put us on notice and
Yeah.
said, you got to get your borders closed to illegal immigration coming through, as well as drugs and crime.
Well, we've
And I
seen that in
thought,
Falkland, right? A big
yeah,
super lab in Falkland. Like Canada has been, I guess, I don't know how it has been or is definitely part of the problem when it comes to drugs.
absolutely. And what he's doing is calling what we all seem to know is that we have an open border and literally it's coming into our borders through our port system and then going down into the US. So I do think that this is a pretty big signal to our Canadian political leaders and something that we need to take note of. You were mentioning before we got on air that David Eby had kind of puffed up his chest and was going to talk about how Canada needed to get tough. Look, Eby needs to get tough. We need a port police system that's actually going to close our border to criminals and to drugs. And right now, we do not have that. And it's pretty scary, actually, how much of the drug trade in North America is coming through our border.
Yeah, and BC plays a big role in that because one of the biggest ports in Canada is our British Columbia ports, right? And tons of that stuff comes through that seaport.
Yes, absolutely. And furthermore, the RCMP actually know how it transfers to the rest of the country. They can show you on a map where the drug trade is going, where the semis take it to after the port is after it's come off of the port, how it's disseminated through the rest of the country. And it's one of the reasons that Kelowna has been such a hot spot. And I think one of the reasons that that drug bust was made in Falkland, largest drug bust. It was a Breaking Bad,
Yeah, it
episode
was
gone.
ridiculous.
Yes, exactly. 95 million doses of fentanyl that was confiscated there. What's really odd is that they have yet to make any arrests. I think there's been one arrest made with this huge drug bust. So I'm very curious as to see what's going to happen there as well.
Yeah, no, it's. I watched an interview on Global with a former minister saying this Trump thing could actually be really good for Canada. That we have to take our immigration seriously. That we
Oh,
have to that we have to start strengthening our borders. We have to stop the flow of drugs. And it just puts our politicians on notice. He says that we need to work towards because there is no nation without a strong border.
100%. And we are, as Canadians, I think, lulled into this false belief that the US is going to come to our aid at any given moment. And I think what this says is that unless we actually take this seriously, the US is not going to be supporting us in the same way and not going to be really coming and making sure that we're as safe as we possibly can be. I think we need to take this seriously. I think we need to look at things like our border, and I also think that it's going to get very scary here for a little bit. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get the
No,
backlight.
that's all good.
I'll adjust it as soon as you start talking again, Jim. But the other thing is why this matters. A 25% tariff. We've only been seeing the interest rates coming down because the Bank of Canada has been seeing that inflationary pressure coming off, and this is going to make it worse. You think about a car part. Every single time a car part transfers over that border, which it could be 10 times in the making of that car. It's going to be tariffed at a 25% rate. That's massive. And that's going to make, whether it's a car part, whether it's food, whether it's goods and services, it's going to make life for Canadians incredibly more expensive and less prosperous.
And when we talk
Because
about
as
fentanyl, all the deaths in the United States and in Canada, like I think Tom Hooman said, like there's more deaths from fentanyl than all the terrorist actions over the past few years, and that they're going to label fentanyl dealers and the cartels as terrorists and go after them under the Terrorist Act.
Yeah, well, as we should, we need a government to get really tough on this aspect and to really stand up for Canadians. I'm concerned. I mean, we knew and we predicted that this was going to be one of the elements to a Trump government that Canadians were going to have to look at. I didn't expect that he would tie these two together. I thought he was just protecting their economy and protecting their own manufacturing jobs, etc. This is actually coming at it from a very different tact that I wouldn't have predicted. But in some ways, it's an easier way for us to respond with getting tougher on our fentanyl criminals and then also on our border.
A lot of the pundits in the United States are saying Trump isn't running for re-election. So this is about his legacy and about doing what he says he promised to Americans. So I think a lot of people that expect him to bend in certain things, I don't think he's going to bend in a lot of the ways. He's going to do what's good for America. And no different than our own Danielle Smith saying she's going to do what's good for Alberta.
Oh, and we should all be expecting our politicians to do what's good for the people that elect them. Absolutely, unequivocally. When we have our prime minister that is at, the environmental conference of the globe, telling people that just because people can't afford food or housing, they should actually, still be very concerned about the environment. I think is cause for concern. And I think it sends a huge signal that our prime minister is not looking after the prosperity and the needs of his electorate, and we have other countries that are taking a harder stance.
I think there was some talk on some of the Canadian networks saying that this would be bad for oil and gas, but I saw stories out there on Fox and that saying the Keystone pipeline will be one of the first things that gets revived. And I don't think that he's going to try and slow down energy, because that's one of his prime directives is to get energy flowing as cheap as possible. And Alberta is a pipeline to great energy resources.
Yeah, I wish I could agree with you wholeheartedly. I do think that there's some risk here. I think that there's some vulnerability that Canada has and that Alberta has on this, largely because of what we saw with the Obama era. Yes, Obama did say that he was going to focus on energy, but he also focused on energy independence. And that's a lot of what Trump is talking about as well. And that had a huge affect and a negative affect on our energy prices in the 2014, 2015 slump and era. Now, there were a lot of global factors that led into that as well. But we do see that with that, I mean, turning on the pumps, as it were, drill, baby, drill. We may see the U.S.'s inventory and reserves accelerate, and with that would come, the price come down the price of.
Would you think that the Keystone XL pipeline would be a good thing for Alberta?
I do. Oh, unequivocally. Alberta should have 3 pipelines right now. They should have an east-west that was shut down by Quebec, and they should have the Keystone that was shut down by the U.S., and they should have the one that did make it across the finish line, which is that Trans Mountain.
So it does, like the stories coming out of the U.S. sounds like the Keystone pipeline will be one of his things to get done, and that was one of his that he was trying to get done before I think that was the first day of the Biden-Harris administration where they killed the Keystone XL pipeline.
Yeah, and they were, it might help to. I should say, it will definitely help to offset any negative pressure on the price of oil. But it's going to be a drop in the bucket if Trump is successful in really increasing the energy production. Biden's put a lot of governors on that production right now, and I think that if Trump has his way and releases it, we could see some of the Canadian oil and gas sector really hurting. I think the other thing that we need to take note of is that these tariffs are going to actually put further pressure on inflation, which will further put pressure on the Bank of Canada, which will further put pressure on our housing prices. There's a trickle down effect that I think that we can't underestimate right now. And in Canada, that's a bigger effect than in the US.
Yeah, so David Eby came out and he said that it's a time for us to act together and act with strength and respond with strength. I just don't know. Like I think like the Ebys and the Trudeaus, with all the negative rhetoric that they've had against Donald Trump, thinking he would never get elected again. A lot of that I think might come to bite them in the butt.
It should. I hope it does. Eby has used the word Trump as a dirty word, as a negative word, and Trump is very retaliatory. He's out for revenge. He will punish those that have gone up against him, and I don't see Eby as anyone that is formidable against Trump. And I think that Eby is trying to be some sort of a rallying cry in and amongst BC, but he's shut down every sort of access to a poker chip that he could have used, whether that was our oil and gas sector, or I would say in particular our mining sector, whether it was in energy production, electricity production on a more environmental front. He has just been so lacking in creating affluence for the British Columbian people that I don't see it. I don't see any actual bite to that bark.
Danielle Smith has booked her ticket for the January 20th inauguration. I doubt if many other premiers will be joining her there. I think she's going there with plans for Keystone and a bunch of stuff, and she's trying to make sure Alberta has a seat at the table at the supposed golden age for the United States.
And I think she will be successful because she, unlike Eby, has a very prosperous province right now and does have those poker chips that we were talking about. She does have energy production. She has accelerated their natural resource sector. So I think that she is going to basically try and negotiate with Trump, and in doing so, I think will at least offset the negative impacts, if not actually get rid of them.
Well, she built her network too. I know when she had Tucker Carlson come into Alberta, there was the petition signed to say to block Tucker from coming in. But now she has like her and Tucker Carlson obviously got together. That Jordan Peterson and those people have direct connections with Donald Trump. So I think she built a network for herself there as well.
Yeah, she also has a strong, a strong conservative sort of sleeper network within her community. Former MPs, former elected officials that had a lot of U.S. ties. At certain points, some of the former MPs that now reside or are back in Alberta were actually cited as some of the most influential in the U.S. because of their networks. So she's got a lot of pull, and like her or not, I think she's going to defend the Albertan people and really work for their prosperity.
She's got a pretty big name in there. She just hired him, Stephen Harper.
Yes.
So
she did. Although, being here in Toronto, the whole, sorry, I'm just going to try and get that glare. But being in Toronto, it's amazing how much the AIMCO, axing of her entire board there has been negatively perceived. So it'll be interesting to see how that's utilized.
Yeah, and then moving on to some more of the British Columbia stuff, Eleanor Sturko has been posting quite a bit as well, and saying BC's NDP decision to avoid fall legislative sitting raises opposition ire. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but
Well, anytime you cancel a fall sitting, it's going to raise opposition ire. But right now, EB can't afford to have a confidence vote. He doesn't have an agreement with the Greens. He doesn't have, a majority because he's posting his own speaker, which is Raj Chauhan, who I think is absolutely one of the most outstanding MLAs. Well-deserved position for him to remain as speaker. He's been the speaker the last 4 years. So I do think that's a positive move for EB to make, but it's one that's very, very dangerous for him. He sits at 46 seats, which could be toppled by the Greens and the Conservatives if they vote in unison. So I do think that is somewhat his rationale. He also has a very weak cabinet. He's got brand new cabinet ministers that don't know right from left. But when Horgan had a new cabinet and a new mandate, he did call a fall election. You know, it was only 2 weeks in duration in 2020, but in the middle of a pandemic, he really felt like it was important to have good governance that was moving forward. I think the first opportunity that we're going to really have to see EB and this new cabinet is going to be in the new year, and that's February, and we will be seeing a budget within the first year. You know, it's going to be a throne speech, and 2 weeks later, the budget will come out and we'll have a chance to see if there's a different direction. I highly doubt that there will be. I think he's going to be running deficits, and I think that's a very dangerous position for British Columbians to be in right now.
Yeah, there's a post by the Conservative Party of BC saying the largest opposition caucus in BC history. So that just speaks to your point of they're basically hanging by a thread there, right? So it's a very tenuous position.
I'll challenge that statistic a little bit in that it is the largest because we just got an increase in the size. So
Right.
in this last election, we had 6 new positions. So they are technically the largest, but I will remind everyone that in 2017, there were actually the largest opposition party because without the Greens, the NDP, who ended up being the governing party, actually would have, there were more BC Liberal back
Yeah,
then.
percentage wise, it's playing with statistics for sure, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, he's right in that it's oh, sorry, I'm making it worse. It's the largest number, but it certainly isn't the largest percentage.
Right. And then there's a poll that was put out by Main Street. We're just moving on to federal. Put out by Main Street research showing that Pierre Poilievre's government would take 260 seats and leave the Liberals with 17.
I saw that, and it actually leaves them in fourth place.
Yeah.
It leaves them in fourth place behind the Bloc Québécois, who would take over as the official opposition, and then the NDP, who would be right next in line. Scary times when your opposition party is a party that platforms on supporting Quebec. So one province is a little bit of a difficult opposition to take on, and so it'll be very interesting times indeed. And you know what? Trudeau is not doing himself any favors. Andrew Coyne, who is a writer for the Globe and Mail, obviously a left-wing writer, he tends more on that side, basically eviscerates Trudeau on this $250 tax vacation as nothing more than bad policy. And I think that he couldn't be more right. They're trying to force the Conservatives to stop the paralyzed Parliament and actually move things forward. But the reason they want to do that is because they will not produce the documents, unredacted documents for the Green Slush Fund. Those documents apparently show that Guilbeault was siphoned over $267 million to his own company, which is a huge, huge conflict of interest that the Canadian people deserve to know. So I think it would be irresponsible, somewhat almost unethical for the Conservatives to unblock Parliament at this point simply to get a GST holiday through. But that's what the Liberals are trying to do right now is force the Conservatives' hand because they're not going to get that through. There's only 3 weeks left of session, so I think that they're pretty much in between a rock and a hard place. I do want to, and I'm sorry if I'm talking too much,
No,
but
great.
I do want to draw attention to what the markets have done since that announcement. The markets have actually started increasing the bond rates, and which increases our long-term interest rates. That is because the Parliamentary Budget Officer has come out and said it's going to cost Canadians $6 billion So that $250 GST check that everyone's going to get, or rebate check that everyone's going to get, is actually going to cost everyone $322 to achieve, and they're going to do that literally through going into more debt. Right now, the markets do not like debt. And whether it's Trump who is introducing this tariff, or whether it's Trudeau who's introducing the tax abatement, they're actually baking that into what it's going to cost for housing. And that's a dangerous place for Canadians to be in right now.
It's misleading and disingenuous. Like, some of the tweets that came out from Justin Trudeau himself saying that, you might just close that curtain maybe a bit, saying that we're taking the GST off groceries. There is no GST on groceries per se. There's GST on snack foods. There's GST on beer and wine and that kind of stuff. But to say you're taking it off groceries is just misleading the public, right? Because most groceries, like there's some people posting, they shop $400 and there was a $3 worth of GST on that bill, and it's because that relates to snack foods and stuff like that. And it's to come out and tell Canadians that you're giving them a break to buy junk foods like cheese balls because they can't afford to buy blueberries and strawberries, and they're getting scurvy because of the high price of real groceries, and to give them that break is, I think Andrew was saying some of that stuff, that it's just bad policy. Taking GST off of booze, which again seems to be bad health policy. Taking GST off snack foods like cheese balls and corn chips just seems so... well, according to Chrystia Freeland, people are suffering through just a vibe session. It's really good out there. They just don't realize it. I'm sure you try to explain that to somebody that's not making their mortgage payment, can't pay the rent, can't put gas in the car, that it's just a vibe session.
Oh, and it's simply false. It's not a vibe session. You look at what's happened with inflation, and it's not like inflation has gone down. We haven't seen negative inflation, which means that prices have gone up over year over year over year over year. There was an analysis done in the summer that I read that showed, and the headline read, if it feels like your dollar's going less far than it used to, here's why. And it basically showed that the cost of living had gone up by 24% since, like, basically in the last 2 years. So every single month it was going up by 1%. And I don't know about you, but wages have not gone up by that much. Profits have not gone up by that much. In fact, if anything, profits have plummeted in the corporate sector, as evidenced by the government. And even if we bring it back local, the BC government redid their forecast back in September, stating that corporate taxes were way down and predicted to be way down. And that's not because the tax rate has gone down, it's gone up. But what's happened is that companies are making less money here in BC. So I see us in a really dangerous tailspin. This is not a vibe session. This is an actual recession. And the only reason it hasn't been a full recession is because our GDP has gone up because of our population increase. But, GDP per capita has plummeted. We are underpacing all the rest of the G7, and we are in some very, very costly and dangerous times. And back to what you were talking about at the beginning, Jim, this is bad policy because this is bad health policy and bad financial policy. For him to say that, we're going to take it off of the foods that you mentioned, whether it's alcohol or whether it's snack foods, those are the absolute worst for Canadians. And right now, sometimes, yes, you're right, it's all they can afford because, food production has become so much more expensive with carbon taxes and with the cost of all of the different levies and bureaucracy that our farming communities are under. So I think we have to really look at what Canadians want less expensive, rather than putting this this token in front of everyone and saying, yeah, somehow this is going to make our life better. You don't pull $250 off a credit card that you don't actually have the cash for, that's going to end up costing $322 for every Canadian. That just makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, well, we'll leave it there for today, I guess. Other than to say, like, well, Montreal burned. Justin Trudeau was at Taylor Swift concert collecting bracelets from 14-year-old girls.
Montreal burned and Trudeau danced. I don't know how else you could say it. I cannot imagine a more inappropriate behavior for a prime minister than what we witnessed on the
I know if I was doing that, I would be in big trouble from my family if I was collecting bracelets from a bunch of 14-year-olds.
Yes, and you know what? I mean, I watched Montreal. If anyone has not seen those images, those videos, it was horrific. And I do believe that honestly, it was probably the almost the most unstatesman like behavior from our prime minister. I would say almost, because there were a few other times that I can remember, whether it was singing late at night in $10,000 hotel rooms, or whether it was misbehaving in costume in foreign countries and annoying dignitaries. But I hope that the Canadian people figure this out. Being in Toronto, obviously it's a more liberal leaning province, but I haven't found anyone that's talked positively. Even those that I know are very, very well connected inside of the federal Liberal Party. They're talking very negatively about Trudeau and saying, yeah, we need to lose the next election just so that we can get a different government. So for those watchers of yours, Jim, that are like, you guys are too far right, I'm all for the British Columbian and Canadian people, and I want the best policies possible to bring us.
I think both of us just want a better tomorrow for all the people, right? Like a better tomorrow. And I think that's the most important thing. Like we need to focus on just people's basic needs. And it's kind of sad that we're in a country as Canada, such as Canada, where we have to talk about just basic needs for such a large percentage of our population, when, with food banks breaking records, just it's scurvy, those kind of things should not be happening in a nation as rich as Canada in resources.
Agreed.
Anyway.
Hope for tomorrow. I like that. It's got to be our theme.
There you go. Thank you for watching Kelowna Now, and thank you, Renee, and speedy trip home, and speedy and safe trip.
Absolutely. Home tomorrow. We'll see you soon.
All right. Bye now.
Okay, bye-bye.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent.